Molly and Joe, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for taking part in this interview today. Could you please introduce yourselves and tell us what you do?
Sure. I'm Joe. This is Molly.
Yeah, we've been writing books for about 12 years.
A long time.
Yeah. And after we wrote our first one, The Soulmate Experience, we started doing coaching, typically of singles looking for relationships, but also of couples generally who are in a good relationship and want to make it better. And that's where our newest book, Wild Monogamy, came from.
That's really interesting about the soulmate experience, because I've been reading this book, thinking about it from a couple's perspective, a couple that's already established. And so what advice can you give for singles looking for soulmates? That's really intriguing. I think I'll read that one next. Do you have anything you can share?
I think one of my biggest tips is when you hear most relationship coaches talk, dating coaches, they always tell you to make a list. This is their...
Okay.
And I've found so many times in coaching people that list turns out to be a list of limitations.
Okay,
we probably
explain.
wouldn't have met had we had those lists going for us.
Right. Mm-hmm. Because you would have had on your list.
I would have had on my list no redheads, believe it or not.
Okay. What's wrong with redheads?
Oh, there's nothing wrong with redheads, I've come to find out.
Okay.
In fact, I'm more attracted to them than ever.
Okay.
And I would have had on my list that the guy would have had to have a college education to interest me.
Okay.
I would have never met him on an app where I ticked a box that said, well, at least 4 years of college. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's a brilliant man. He didn't need a college education.
Okay.
It was a waste of time for him.
But I find in my experience, sometimes when you have these lists and then you go for something or do something completely different, it can impact you more because you're kind of going against your own, your own rules kind of thing. Did you find that as well?
Well, I think one of the things is that the things that should be on lists are the things that should be on everybody's lists. You're looking for somebody who's going to support you, who's going to love you, who isn't going to cheat on you, and all of those things.
Who's a good person, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Those should just be baseline. That's what we're looking for in a relationship. So it's the things beyond that where I always find that if people bring a little more creativity, creative thinking to those ideas, they can expand the possibilities for themselves.
Okay. Anything else you could like to share before we start getting into the monogamy?
Yes, I mean, that's why another reason we wrote Wild Monogamy is because we were finding that so many people were not finding people who were interested in a long-term connection, primarily because of the impending boredom that they were anticipating.
Excellent. So we'll come to that in a moment. When I first came across your content, I was blown away by this glow and union and energy that you both share. And I assumed that you were a new couple. Then I learned you've been together for over 20 years. Is that correct? So tell us, what is your secret about keeping this connection alive?
I think for us, the secret is that we are always exploring how to make a relationship better, right? Mm-hmm. Whether we're doing it for us or whether we're talking to somebody or a group, it's always in our minds. So it's something that we're living and breathing every day. How do we make this relationship better? And I think that's why it seems like we're in a new relationship. We get that all the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And also, so obviously you're in a great relationship. So what inspired you to take this great relationship and actually share it with others to actually help them? What was that transition and how did you come to that realization?
I think we'd been in a relationship for about 4 years, I think. And one day we just kind of looked at each other and said, wow, this is amazing, this relationship that we've had. We haven't had a harsh word, no arguments, no nothing. We can either just keep enjoying this or we can try to put all these ideas into a book. And with Molly being a book editor and every editor has a book burning inside them, it was an easy call to make. It was tougher for me because, feeling that imbalance in education, I initially felt like, well, I didn't have that much to contribute. But, once we got into the process, I think we realized that we have a really good synergy in terms of how we approach things and how we write about them.
So I'm assuming this process of writing the book must have been very connecting for you both.
Absolutely.
Would that be true to assume?
Absolutely. I think it takes up most of the time we're together talking about these ideas because they're fascinating when you're talking about a topic like jealousy and how different people could approach it in new ways. I mean, that's an exciting topic. It gets you
kind of charged up. Yeah.
I love it. And how long did it take you to write the book?
What's that?
How long did it take to write the book, and how was the process?
The first book took us 4 years. Right? Yeah.
Wow. The soulmate one.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And were you referring to your own connection? So how did you meet?
Believe it or not, we met on Craigslist.
Oh, wow. Just goes to show you never know. That's amazing.
Which was the perfect venue for us to meet because we didn't exchange pictures. We just launched into this dialogue about relationships that hasn't stopped in 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Wow. And then
that was actually really exciting. By the time we met in person, I was in love with him.
So you had a long kind of online exchange before that?
About a month.
We
or so,
did.
right?
And again, that's something that most dating coaches would tell you not to do. They'd tell you to meet as soon as possible. But for us, it just worked. It was a fascinating conversation. And when we finally met, the moment I saw his face, I'm like, wow, did I hit the jackpot?
Oh, that's amazing. And then you did this soulmate experience book. Is that first? Yeah.
Yeah.
It took 4 years.
And the new one took 7.
Oh my God, that's incredible. So how was that process? Were you just doing a bit every week, or what was it like? Or
it was pretty constant.
More than a bit every week.
And there are so many topics in there that are so sensitive. And we interviewed dozens and dozens of people and coached people on whatever their issues were and had them try out some ideas and report back. So all of that's a really long process.
Yeah, because what I've seen in some dating coaches that they just focus on their own relationship as being the blueprint for their success. But I think you need to step outside that and look at other couples as well, and look at what's true of relationships in general. I just went to see Jay Shetty in Barcelona on Monday. He was in the theater with his 8 Rules for Love. It was really interesting because he wasn't just, coming from a perspective of, oh, I found the perfect relationship and you can too. It was more about these different statistics and science and all these different statistics about love and breakups. And it was very insightful and a different, taking people's different stories from the audience as well. But I guess you've done that as well. It's not just like focusing on we've got this great relationship, we can share it, but it's a bit more, there's a bit more depth.
I think that the first book was more, what is working for us? How do we, things like we keep expectations to a minimum. That sort of concept is what we shared in the Soulmate Experience. But this new book, so universal idea is that if you can create a safe, accepting space, then you can bring all your stuff into it, your insecurities, your fears, your inhibitions, and you can find ways to work with them. And that's why we interviewed so many people, because we wanted a broad range of what are people feeling insecure about? What are ways they can work with that together to give as many ideas as possible so that people can start thinking creatively about whatever's coming up in their relationship.
So you also coaches then for couples?
Yeah.
Coach couples. Do you coach together?
We do.
Wow. Generally, sometimes you'll take somebody on your own,
yes.
but oftentimes we'll coach together. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That must be really interesting to work together and around this topic, completely, or living and breathing this whole.
Yeah, if you weren't into relationships, you probably wouldn't want to hang out with us for very long.
That's interesting. So when I was reading your book, Wild Monogamy, obviously, first of all, the title really caught my attention. And especially given the fact that, I've been doing this podcast for a couple of years now, and there's a lot more, and I've been a sexual wellness content creator for 14 years. So there's a lot more awareness about, let's say, polyamorous relationships, open relationships. There's a lot of buzz about that. And monogamy is getting a kind of bad rap lately. It maybe seems boring for some. So the title Wild Monogamy seems very alluring. So can monogamy really be wild?
Yes.
If we can find ways to use everything we're coming into the relationship with, and everything that comes up in the relationship, you know, we all have our own interests. We all have things that turn us on. We might not have ever talked about some of those things. If we can find a way to create a space where we can share those things and find a way to explore them, even in a small way,
it can be really exciting.
We can keep finding new ways to, you know, stretch ourselves together.
Yeah, I would describe myself as a almost commitment phobe, naturally monogamous person, because I think monogamy has to be something that you desire. It's not imposed upon you. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, it's kind of, because I had a very strict, you know, a strict Irish Catholic parent. So sometimes some relationships that seem very restricting feels like I'm going back to that time of being 15 in control. Like, where are you? Who are you with? Whereas I think it has to become, you know, come from a place of desire, really, and a mutual desire. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have been in open relationships, and some things worked for me and some things didn't. And I didn't necessarily come into this thinking we're going to be monogamous, but it's just been so fun and so entertaining, and so, gosh, just keeps opening me up to feeling better and better about myself, better and better about my sexuality, having more fun together, that, you know, this works.
That's something I do admire from people in the BDSM community or the polyamorous communities, that they have conversations that tend to be a little bit more provocative, or, you know, go beyond some limits that most monogamous or vanilla couples are scared to explore. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why we have so many questions for conversation in that book.
Okay.
You know, that starts at the beginning, we have something we call the intimacy inquiry, and we're, you know, warn people, you know, you want to go slowly with this and not just launch right into all of these questions. There were we had a lot of couples trying these out when we were writing, and two in particular just went headstrong into those questions and started talking about them, and in an hour found themselves in breakdown, relationship breakdown.
Oh, wow.
They just too fast to be able to hold what was coming up from trying out, conversing about these topics that they weren't used to talking about.
I actually did it a couple of weeks ago, and I found it. Can you explain what it is for those who don't know what it is?
The intimacy inquiry?
Yes.
Questions about all kinds of things in relationship that people are often afraid to talk about, whether that's your insecurities or your sexual history or your desires or your fears.
Or your beliefs about how a particular relationship should look.
Right.
So,
or, you know, your history with jealousy, or what makes you jealous. All of those kinds of conversations, you know, where are your areas of shame? So it goes very gently into these things, but then it goes very deeply into them. Because if you can share with your partner something that you feel ashamed about, that you've never been able to talk about, then we get to this place where you can start helping each other heal from that. And that's where the real juicy stuff is.
Absolutely. That's something that I've learned very recently, actually, because years ago I used to kind of feel that the trauma I was experiencing in relationships was adding to my childhood trauma. It's like I was creating new trauma, new vulnerabilities, and that made me kind of avoid relationships. Whereas I went to this spiritual event once, and they talked about relationships being healing, and I was like, really? It just seemed like such a strange concept for me, because it seemed like you're adding to these, maybe not choosing the right ones, maybe the toxic ones are, but it's very interesting concept to think of relationships being healing, you know. And then I think it's kind of like an alchemy. We've got something in the back here talking about seeing intimacy issues as perfect opportunities for healing, growth, and pleasure. That's very empowering. You're taking a negative and making it into a positive. Would you like to share anything more about that?
Well, you can imagine if you can help your partner overcome a fear or an inhibition, how grateful they're going to be to you, because they've probably carried it around at least since their last relationship.
For instance, when I was young, my father was obsessed with large breasts.
Oh, I saw that right there.
He talked about them constantly. He made comments constantly. When we watched television, everything was focused on breasts and rating women for how big their breasts were, what meant how important they were, how desirable they were. And small-chested me, I was like, I'm never going to have what it takes to be an attractive, desirable woman. And I carried that idea with me that my breasts were insufficient for all those years till I met you. I had never let go of that. And there was an evening when he saw some look on my face and he asked me what was up. And we, established a safety in our relationship where we really could talk about anything. And so I just spilled it all, that I felt insufficient about the size of my breast.
Yeah. And so that prompted me to do a little exercise.
Oh yeah, share. Please share. That sounds juicy.
It was a good part of a day, wasn't it? Where, I had to show her that her breasts for her were perfect. And so to do that, I photographed her in all different positions, undressed, in the shower. And then we went over these pictures and I showed her what I saw in them.
Yeah.
And how, to me, they were perfect.
Yeah.
And
he got me to see them through his eyes. And he also did a lot of tactile, sensual kinds of experiences where close your eyes, stop thinking about how they look, and I just want you to focus on the feeling that's happening here. And he did all kinds of things with implements and water. And, honestly, it is so true that by the end of that evening, I had let go of this idea that I'd carried around for almost 35 years.
yeah.
Wow.
And I never thought about it again.
Whether it's with me or whether we go to a clothing optional spa,
doesn't matter.
She's totally fine.
I never thought about it again. I never had this idea that my breast should be bigger. Like, I see the perfection. He got me to see that.
So were you closed off in terms of the pleasure in that area before then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So what are the rewards and benefits of a monogamous relationship in your opinion and experience?
Well, I think one thing, and it doesn't have to be monogamous to do this, but we really have this opportunity to create this safe container where we can be anything. We can show up as anything. We can share anything that's going on with us, anything that we've had trouble with. And I don't know that it would be harder in a multi-person relationship, but there's something about this dynamic that just makes that really easier for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes we imagine having other relationships and we think, wow, it would take so much, right? To do so much time and energy to do them justice, right? Because we would want to do other relationships like we did our own.
Yeah.
And so we keep coming back to the fact that no, this is what works for us. We're super happy doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that we, one of the last chapter in that book called Monogamy with Benefits, we're not afraid of having experiences around or with other people. It's just not something we're going after, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that drawn to it.
So we do share a few experiences we've had that are very mild, but absolutely have added so much to our relationship that we can have those experiences. And
for me, it seems like more a safe space, more sacred. I think that's my kind of.
That's a good word.
I like to kind of create a cocoon, and when you only desire that one person, they give you so much, especially when it's Like you talked about, I made a TikTok earlier. I just read a little bit out of your book about the 4 dimensions, 4 arenas of sexuality. Like when someone's getting into your headspace, or it's transcending the physical. It's very difficult to replace that connection. When someone's in your heart or in your head. The physical, it's kind of it's a much more shallow plane in general.
I did have this experience. When I was in a long-term relationship, and we were monogamous for a good period of time, a number of years. And when we decided to open it up, the minute I had an experience with someone else, this is just my own experience and what happened to me, I felt myself disconnecting from my primary partner in a way that never came back. I could feel it happening, like, oh, my interest is so much over here now. I am so intrigued with this. This will take a lot of work to keep this connection strong, but it never had the strength that it had before. I mean, that's just how I operate, that all my attention wanted to be over here because this was so exciting and this was so new. So, yeah.
Wow. I think my way of resolving that would be, I've done in the past is role play, just becoming someone else. Have you experimented with that? Because that can be very exciting, like doing different roles, different names, different person, but you're still the same people, but exploring different characteristics and personalities.
We've actually done that quite a bit. I was thinking about the time in the bar.
Yeah.
When we pretended that I was hired for the evening.
Oh, cool.
And we had this conversation knowing that other people could hear us around there.
It was hilarious. The couple next to us was just so intrigued with, oh my God, this woman hired this guy for the evening. And it just made us go on and on and on.
You can see them leaning, to hear better what we're talking about.
And it just stirred us up. We just went wild with that. I asked him about his previous encounters, and he asked me about previous service providers I'd hired, and we just went on and on for so long that night. It was hilarious.
And it got us all hot. And I think we went right back home and had sex.
I remember watching a film years ago. I just didn't see the whole thing, but I just remember seeing a snippet of this film where there was a woman in a stark, smoky bar sitting at the bar, and all the guys were leering at her. And there's one guy in the corner looking a bit more, and he came over and bought her a drink. The next scene, you see them having sex somewhere in a car. Then they go home and pay the babysitter. I just thought that was so cool. You're to kind of go out and be strangers, I guess it's similar to what you just described there. Yeah. Especially if you're doing it in public, it has an extra and different names, different clothes, or whatever have you.
It's exciting.
Yeah, we have done different names just on the spur of the moment. We were talking to a guy in a bar again, and I just told him that I'd been a stripper in Florida, and I put myself through college as a stripper, and he was so fascinated, and I just had to keep making up more stuff about that story. It was hilarious. It's so fun. And I suppose people could think, well, you're doing this terrible thing, you're lying to this guy, but he was quite entertained, and we were too.
So what was the harm?
Yeah.
Amazing. Let me see what else I can find here in my list of questions. So one chapter that really intrigued me was the one about the healing power of eroticism. We've just talked about how relationships can be healing, but what about erotica? How can we use eroticism to heal?
So eroticism is, basically inspiring sexual desire. And that's exactly what he did when he was working with me around my breasts, right? He made that such an erotic experience. And that concept we've taken to so many couples. When somebody has an issue, this is a great example. If they have an issue with a body part, my stomach or my butt or something is not right. And if their partner loves them and loves that part of them, or anyway wants them to feel good about it, there's so many things they can do, making love to that part, finding ways to get them to see it, as Joe did, get them to see it through their eyes. Like, let go of your conception of it for a moment and listen to my truth as I describe how sexy it is to look at your ass, that sort of thing. making it erotic, this part of you that you've rejected, and getting you to feel that desire, and getting it, however they can do it. And that's why we give so many examples in there, because there's so many different ways this could be approached, to be able to get them to feel your desire for them through that body part.
Amazing. And what advice would you give to a couple who have lost the spark? Is it possible to get it back? I guess you must have many many of your clients must have that issue, and that's why they come to you, I would assume. Is that correct?
You know, we find that we like working with people who still like each other. I think when you get to a place where there are relationships in breakdown and there are so many issues, I find that, you know, I'm not a therapist, we're not therapists. That's a more difficult situation. But if they still like each other,
then we can help them.
Then there are ways. There are,
especially if they both want to improve their relationship. You know, they both recognize that, hey, something it's kind of slipped away, that connection.
Which is really,
how do we get it back?
Right. Yeah. It's so common because we just get into our routines and do our things and day after day. So we've got to try something different. We've got to find the edges of our comfort zones and play there. And that's one of the things that we take couples through in our book, is how to find where your comfort zones are. And that's one of the reasons that we want them to have all those conversations, because one of them will be comfortable with these ideas, these things you could do sexually. One of them will be comfortable with these. And we want to find the place where they could stretch a little bit together and play. We call it playing at the edges of your erotic comfort zones.
Because why is that so important, do you think, taking it to limits?
When we're newly with someone, it's all an exploration. It's all
exciting.
Yeah, it's all
on the edge, right? Because you don't know what's coming next.
Because you haven't ever done that before.
Right.
But when we've done it 1,000 times the same way, you know, of course we're bored.
And maybe that edge is a little bit farther out.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. So what's your what about a sexless relationship? What would your number one tip to be to get that intimacy back? Because I guess that happens with a lot of people.
It does. And again, I think it depends on the quality of the relationship for us. To be able to have suggestions is, are they both wanting to get that back? Because if both of them aren't, that's really tough.
Yeah.
And
even one of them doesn't want to.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That so often it seems that the best thing is a change in the structure of the relationship, and that it's not going to, you know, there is no fix for that that's going to get them back to where they were. So it sounds like kind of a downer, but I think that's so often the case when one person is just no longer interested.
Yeah.
And the other person's striving, struggling to get them interested. And it's like, one of the things you have to look at is the possibility that that's not possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really hard situation there, sexual incompatibility, that rejection, and also from the other side, the frustration, like, you know, it's very, very hard.
And but yet so common, right? As we get older, and libido diminishes for one person quicker than another. And, you know, so it's a challenge that a lot of people are going to face.
Is there anything you can share about aging libidos to keep it? Because obviously how we have sex changes over time, and you can't just do the same thing as you were when you were 18. I mean, it all changes. So, and do you have any tips about that?
Right. Yeah. One of the stories that's so moving to me, even now reading about, is a couple that met, and he was physically unable to get an erection because of medical issues. And she had, her vagina had gotten to the point where she couldn't actually have penetration. So here's this couple who thought when they first got together, well, what can we do? There's nothing we can do, because sex means penis and vagina. Yeah. And they started to just say, no, we're going to find new ways. And their exploration together, which was so lovely that they wrote a whole piece for us that we included in the book, of, wow, these two people have an incredible sexual connection, an incredible sex life that goes way beyond anything either of them had experienced when they had fully operational body parts. And so inspiring to me that as time goes on, we just have to keep exploring and forget these ideas of what sex is, these very limited ideas of that sex equals the things we've given names to, these sex acts we've given names to, and that's it.
Mm. Another thing that can kill the passion is actually living with someone and getting all those domestic chores day to day. And do you have any tips about how to make those things sexy?
Yeah, do them naked.
Okay, because I was on a TV thing recently here in Spain, and there was a woman, I think she's in her 70s, and she's very happily married, because there was just a panel of all different people of different ages and different relationship statuses. And this woman was saying that, they sleep naked. That was one of the tips. And whenever, she's chopping the vegetables, there's always kissing with her husband. They've been together, since she was in her 20s.
Yeah.
But I guess so. Yeah, doing them naked.
This idea of being intentional about it and thinking about it and making an effort to notice. One of the things that I love to do is when I see him doing domestic chores, I take pictures of things I like. When he bends over a lot cleaning things. It's just something he and he's got
with an apron, with a naked with an apron.
And I take pictures of it to remind myself, this is my really good looking partner. He's in this great position scrubbing the floor right now, and his ass looks amazing. And I post those pictures with captions. It's one of the ways that I keep my eyes open to his attractiveness. I don't let myself not see it.
Okay. That's amazing. So what about in the jealousy? I was intrigued about you talk about rational versus irrational jealousy. Could you explain the difference and how to deal with both?
So most people that we talk to who are feeling jealous are having what we call irrational jealousy, which is jealousy brought on by mostly the thoughts they're thinking about a situation, not something that's actually happening. Like, oh, my boyfriend's paying attention to that attractive woman over there, and that's causing. It's not that's causing me jealousy. It's my insecurity and the things that I'm telling myself about what that means that are causing my jealousy. So that's what we call irrational jealousy. There's really not anything physically happening to be worried about. Rational jealousy is more when, your partner comes home and says they've cheated on you, right? And I will feel all kinds of things that I might call jealousy, but it's, you can feel insecure, you can feel afraid of what this means for the future and all of that stuff. That's more of a rational experience. And so where the work is to be done is with that irrational jealousy, which is generally around this fear of loss, these insecurities we have, these ideas we've been fed by our culture that I should be the one and only person you're ever attracted to.
If not, you should be jealous, right?
Yeah, I guess the irrational is kind of when someone's overstepped those boundaries, gone against those agreements.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
and that can be a little tougher to deal with, right? You've got all that underlying stuff. How did this happen? What wasn't going on in a relationship? So yeah, the irrational jealousy is
it's something that you can work with, and it's something that you can get better at. And it's something that if you've got a great relationship, that your partner can actually even help you.
Okay, so you hinted earlier about how it can be a good thing or could be a kind of juicy thing. So could you expand now on that?
Yeah. Right. So if I have, let's say that I have a fear that Joe's interested in women with large breasts. Let's say that stuff is still playing around in my mind. It's not. But when we go to a party, I'm going to pick out all the women with large breasts and be monitoring him to make sure he's not watching them or looking down their chest. And if I can talk to him about it and say, I have this insecurity, and could you help me with this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's all she has to do, right? Is tell me what she's thinking, and I'll work with her on it.
So how would you work with me at a party if I had told you that?
Well, I would probably tell you that I'm going to look at all women, whatever the size of their breasts, and why don't you stand over here with me and we'll do it together. Right. So that you can see there's no threat. It's just me as a guy looking around, finding attractive people and acknowledging that. to myself even, or to her, it's so yeah, there's always ways to work with jealousy. You gonna tell a story about
well, I was just, I've worked with it so much in my life that it's very hard for me to feel jealous. So I actually go out, go do something for me to feel jealous.
Go flirt with somebody.
Yeah.
She's always asking me when I come back from the pool, well, did you flirt with anybody today? Like wanting to hear it.
I do.
Wanting to hear that, feel that little bit of jealousy.
Yeah, it takes quite a bit. Yeah. So if we're out and he strikes up a conversation with someone who's attractive, I love that.
Really? Explain. That's very intriguing.
Yes. So there was a time when he went up to order us drinks, and a woman came up to him and started talking to him, and it was obvious to me she was, wanting to see if he was single. And instead of, I know some people would rush up to protect their interests in that situation, but I actually walked a ways behind her so that I could look at him from the perspective she was seeing him from. So I'm looking over her shoulder at him going, yeah, he looks cute. Like if I just saw him in a bar and I hadn't met him and I was interested in finding someone to go hang out with, I'd be interested. Yeah.
You almost said go home with.
That too. Yeah, he's cute. And I want that conversation to go on and keep going. I want to get that feeling that
just enough jealousy.
Just enough jealousy.
Well, why do you get off on it, or what's the?
It's exciting.
The risk.
Logically, there's no difference between the feeling that comes up with jealousy and the feeling of excitement, right?
Okay.
The heart's racing, the blood pressure goes up. There's no difference physiologically. So I can feel those feelings and interpret it as passion and desire for him.
Okay. Interesting. So when did you release Wild Monogamy? When did it come out? Is it new?
A month ago?
Yeah.
About a month ago.
Okay, it's super new. Okay, amazing. And are you thinking about the next book already?
We are going to do a revision of our first book, The Soulmate Experience.
Okay.
It's been out 12 years, and there's a lot that we've learned because we've been together for 12 more years and we've coached a lot of people, and it could use some updating. So
refreshing.
It's still very popular. It sells very well, and I really want to put new material in there to be more helpful.
Absolutely, because I mean things have changed so much in the last 10 or 15 years even. I mean with apps, dating apps, and it's changed so much. I mean, it used to be, I've never done a dating app ever because I've just been too afraid of the location things. I used to be quite well known here in Barcelona on the local radio and stuff. I didn't want to have my picture within 500 meters. You know what I mean? That whole thing just made me feel a bit not so good. And also it's very reductive, just picture, age, and a sentence. But then there's new apps. There's like Hinge, which is a bit more depth, and there's Bumble. There's all these different apps all of a sudden. And I think the way we meet people has just changed so much. People are not relying on just going to a bar or a club on a Saturday night. It's just more diverse, I suppose. There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
And then with COVID, that brought on even more challenges in terms of meeting people in person.
Yeah.
There are some apps where you don't have to put photographs of your face, which I quite like because, again, we met on Craigslist where you didn't need it.
Yeah.
Pictures of your face. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate not having to fill out boxes of all of these
expectations.
Ways of defining yourself and what you want. I remember when I first went on Craigslist and searching the posts that I liked, that I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah.
And that this was
so what grabbed your attention from his ad then? So I'm assuming that, Jo, you put the ad and then she responded. Is that correct? So what was it about the ad? Let's share.
The subject line was, "Yes, I'm married, but I'd like what my wife has."
And which is?
Affairs.
She was
okay.
She was having affairs,
and not agreed upon affairs.
No, and it was a sticking point for much of our relationship. And I there was a point in time when I finally succumbed, I guess you could say, to like, okay, this is who she is. And I stood back and I looked at, okay, what is she getting out of this? And I could understand, the things you were getting. We'd been married for a number of years, and we had kids, and it probably wasn't that exciting. And, so she's looking for some excitement. And I thought, yeah, I get it. I've been in the same relationship with this lack of excitement. And so rather than make my wife wrong again, I basically said, okay, you can have this. I get it. And I also want to experience this.
And he put out a post and I met him.
Okay, so what was it about that post that intrigued you then? That attracted you?
loved two things. One, I loved that it was so positive. He was just so honest in this post. He seemed such a sweetheart to be so honest about what was going on with him and what he'd tried to do in that situation to make things better. And also the idea of being with someone who'd been with a cheating partner for well over a decade, right? Yeah. And being the person I am, which is, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do, something that I told you I wouldn't do, I couldn't do. So I knew I was a really safe person for him. And I just thought, this is going to be a lot of fun.
I was like a virgin with her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why we started talking about relationships, because of the content of his post. And
okay. So about your limits and boundaries came from that, about monogamy, I suppose. Is that correct?
It wasn't explicit,
right?
But it was definitely in my nature to hold a really safe place for him, where he would just know that was never going to happen here.
Wow, there's a lot of healing there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So then you kind of got separated, divorced, and then you kind of got together. Is that what happened then?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 20 years ago. 20.
Oh, it was a beautiful story. So a couple of quick questions for you. What is the book that changed your life apart from your own?
Do you have mine?
No, it's probably the relationship course I took as opposed to a book.
Yeah.
I took a very intensive relationship course, trying to make things work with my wife. And that was a relationship that was too far gone by that point. But there were so many great things that I learned about relationships in that course, that when we met, it was like the communication just flowed so well, because she was right on the same page as I was. And I think that really helped us to start this relationship, as we found so much common ground.
How about you, Molly? What was the book?
I would have to say The Power of Now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've not read that yet, but it's on my list. It's
yeah. I've read it many times, and I will pick it up at any time and read a sentence and just carry the sentence with me through the day. And it just makes me feel so calm and connected to the world. It's just beautiful. It's just poetry.
Amazing. I might have to buy that. So which phrase, affirmation, or quote do you live by?
Well, I wish I'd had time to think of this, because there are so many.
Yeah.
One is from your relationship teacher.
Which
it's
one?
All working.
Oh yeah.
What's that? Sorry.
It just that it's all working.
Okay.
And, that this is just where it's supposed to be. It's moving in the direction it's supposed to go. And
that's very centering.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so many that I use. I can't think of one on the spot.
What about a phrase that defines your relationship, or a philosophy? How would you have a sentence?
I would have to say that it's staying in a place of gratitude. And that's we get to have this time together each day. It's not something I have to force, the gratitude. I just have to tune my attention for a moment to go, this is really special that we have this connection. And just thinking that makes my heart open.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's sweet.
Amazing. So where can people find you?
Molly and Joe, MALI and Joe. We're on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and mollyandjoe.com. We have some free books you can download there.
You have more free books.
Could be on
What
TikTok,
do you
right?
have? What do you have to download on your website?
3 ebooks
Okay.
that are all about relationships,
Okay.
having better relationships.
And what are the titles of those books?
Gosh, what are the titles? Again, I'm coming up blank.
So are they for people who have relationships and to improve them, or what's the
Either way,
okay.
you know, it always starts with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And everything, even Wild Monogamy, is a great book for single people because it really helps you think about what I want and what's possible in a relationship.
Definitely sets the stage.
Yeah. So a crash course in love, sex, and intimacy. That's one of the ones we have on there.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good ebook. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today on the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's been a real pleasure and a huge inspiration speaking to you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.